Hi everyone, welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Today is March 27th, 2018. Today I am joined by my guest, Dr. Robert Orr, Ambassador Robert Orr.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Tokyo on Fire. A lot is going on geopolitically, a lot is going on with the U.S.-Japan relationship. You're right in the thick of it, and you have been involved in this realm. I mean, we've known each other for, 30 years?
Yeah,
and you've always been involved in this kind of matrix.
Yeah.
Initially, you were with Motorola. You moved on to Boeing. You were the president of Boeing here in Japan.
Yeah.
And you've just recently finished a stint as U.S. ambassador for the Asia Development Bank,
Right.
the longest-serving ambassador in Barack Obama's administration.
Yeah.
What a great honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Tim. A real pleasure to be here.
You meet a lot of interesting people, don't you? You live in Kamakura. You live in France. You have a place in Florida.
Yeah.
You run into a lot of interesting people, don't you?
Well, I'm lucky in that sense. A lot of people come to Kamakura and Florida, but I also meet a lot of people. I'm in D.C. because I spend a lot of time there as well. So yeah.
That's not what I was talking about. You had lunch yesterday.
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't have lunch, but I had a meeting with my former boss, President Obama. I was actually on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
So I've noticed a little bit of a jam in the traffic. He doesn't travel with a huge motorcade because he is only the former president, not the current president. So they have a limited detail for him. He travels with, maybe 6 Secret Service?
Well, I don't think he has that many.
3 days?
I don't think he has that many. He traveled with a lot of the people who were from the Obama Foundation who were here, and they actually organized. I was a personal guest of President Obama at the event yesterday. But he's got a lot of interesting contact with Japan. You know, he first came to Japan when he was 6 years old. And the first, as he once told me, the first foreign town he ever visited in his life was Kamakura.
How about that?
Yeah, and he went there with his mother. They were moving to Indonesia, and as he once told me, he said, that my mom took me to the big Buddha in Kamakura, and he said, and when you're 6 years old, it's really a big Buddha.
Yes. All right. Yeah. And it's interesting that you're living there. You invited him, of course, and he says, well, I'm a little bit tied up now.
We got him to come down in 2010.
Okay.
When he was here for the APEC meeting in Yokohama, and I suggested to the White House that he had this experience, and I know Ambassador Roos was very much involved in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mean to put too much of a shine on it, but I really am honored that you're here. You are a regular guy. You're a guy like a lot of guys that I know, that I hang out with, that I've been doing business with. And look at how far you have gone and the amount of skin you have with Barack Obama. It's just really something. Could you tell me a little bit about how this kind of kernel started?
Well, I was president of Boeing Japan. I just like you, Tim, I worked on Capitol Hill as a young buck. And so I always had this interest in politics. And then when I went to, as I grew older, anytime I was when I was a Motorola or I was an academic, I always liked to meet local politicians. And so when I became president of Boeing Japan, Boeing had just moved its headquarters to Chicago. And so I told the staff when I went back, can you set up a breakfast with about 3 or 4 local politicians?
Because you had your D.C. office.
Yeah,
as well.
We had a D.C. office, and then in the beginning they sent me all around the country to see various Boeing facilities to get me up to speed. So anyway, we had this breakfast, and one of the politicians who came was a young fellow, a young state senator named Barack Obama, and we just hit it off. And my relationship with him stemmed from that time.
He's got some chemistry. Was it that you just particularly hit it off with him, or is there something else? I mean, people that I know that have talked with him just indicate how warm and genuine he is.
Yeah.
Not like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton remembered people's name, and he was also very genuine and kind of loving in a kind of political way, right?
Yeah.
Your heart went out to him, and his seemed to go out to you too. Barack had a little bit of a different shtick.
Yeah, I mean, I know Bill Clinton too, and he's got an astounding memory for people that is mind-blowing. But yeah, President Obama is very, very warm. In fact, as an aside, before Sunday, the last time I'd seen him was in January 4 of last year. He was saying goodbye to all of his non-career ambassadors in the White House. Mm-hmm. And we were all kind of glum. And he looked out at us and he said, "Don't feel so blue." He said, "Just think, on January 20, you can call me Barack again."
Well, we can still call you Skipp, but you go by Ambassador, right? Your Excellency. What a great thing. Ambassador. One of the great things about being an ambassador is that's a title for life, isn't it? I mean, it's like being a PhD or a doctor.
Yeah, if you're confirmed in the Senate, you have that title for life. That's right.
Well, what a great thing. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your dedication to the country.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Tell us about the Philippines and the Asia Development Bank. How was that? What kind of a gig was that? 6 years.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating. They asked me about several possible posts, and then the last one was Asian Development Bank. They came to me and they said, "What would you think about going there?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about these banks, but I know it's managed by the Japanese." Mm-hmm. And having been a long-term Japan hand, and I had written my PhD dissertation on Japanese foreign aid policy, I said, I think I might be able to help. And so it was a natural hookup. And then the president called me afterward, and I'd learned at that point that his mother had worked at the Asian Development Bank, and that had an influence, a little pressure. But it's fascinating. You think about the ADB. It's the largest regional multilateral development bank in the world. Only the World Bank is bigger than the ADB. The AIIB, which is the new China bank, has more members, but it doesn't have the capital the ADB does yet. So it's a little bit like being ambassador to the United Nations. You have 67 member countries, and I was the first American elected as dean of the board of the ADB, and so I used to call it being a Senate Majority Leader with no power. But you're constantly sort of balancing with all of these countries. And I think the place that I learned the most about that from was having been a Capitol Hill staffer.
Does the United States have a bit of an advantage in that particular role, that particular position? Because there's a pecking order, obviously, for an organization like that.
We do and we don't. On the one hand, the two biggest capital shareholders are Japan and the United States. It's about 15.7% of the capital for both countries. Mm-hmm. Japan is slightly more. So Japan always has the presidency of the ADB. No other country so far has ever had the presidency. And so if Japan and the United States are together, we own the bank. But we're not always together. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we have differences and we dispute those. But the most important thing, I believe, is for the United States is to do the right kind of nemawashi, the right kind of, digging the roots out to pull the plant out, greasing the system.
Like we did with the tariffs.
That's another topic. But so I think that helped a lot, that we were able to do that. I mean, certainly some of the developing countries in the beginning, they look upon the United States with a little bit of suspicion because, we are so big and strong. But, Tim, you're an old politician yourself. There are ways to smooth that out.
Right.
And the main thing is to create trust. Mm-hmm.
You have a relationship with the current Bank of Japan Governor Kuroda.
Yes, I do.
That's kind of deep, and the tentacles go long, don't they?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, he was the president of the Asian Development Bank when I first arrived in 2010, and he was there until 2013. I worked really well with Kuroda-san. I've got a lot of respect for him, and he's kind of academic in many ways, whereas his successor, who's also a very good friend of mine, Nakao-san, is not as academic. He's a bit more hands-on. Mm-hmm. But Kuroda-san is a wonderful person. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Skipp, I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that you are an expert in U.S. foreign policy, particularly as it relates to Asia, and maybe with a little bit of a tinkling on the U.S.-Japan relationship because of your length of experience here. What's going on now in U.S. foreign policy must just have you at odds with, how you can participate in that dialogue, what's going on, what the projection is for decisions that are being made now. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think our viewers are really interested. A lot of people are just confused about what U.S. foreign policy is these days.
Well, frankly speaking, it's a mess. And part of it relates to the sort of dereliction of duty as it relates to the Department of State, in that we have
Tillerson's fault.
Well, Tillerson gets guidance from the White House ultimately, or he did. But I think he tended to manage the State Department like a corporation, and having been in government and in as a president of Boeing, I can tell you it's not the same.
It's not the same. But at the same time, I mean, he was running a corporation that was 2, 3, 4 times as large as the State Department.
But the difference is that, and also the difference between President Trump in this is that Mr. Tillerson had to report to a board. And President Trump has never reported to a board. And it is a whole different way of looking at things if you have to deal with a board. Now, the problem with the State Department is that it's a conscious decision to gut the department.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what he said on the campaign trail.
And we've got 50 ambassadorial posts that are not filled right now.
Some critical ones.
Very critical, including South Korea.
Right.
We have 10 out of, I think, 15 assistant secretary posts that are unfilled. They may be in the track, but we're over a year into this. This is really a critical situation, and as I mentioned to you earlier, there's about 200 former ambassadors who are generating a letter right now, and I'm one of the signatories, and it's both Republican and Democrat, career, non-career, to send to the Senate.
Wake-up call?
To say to Secretary of Designate Pompeo, we need to address these issues, some of what I just mentioned. And I think it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, apparently the president is bent on reducing the footprint of the U.S. government in foreign policy circles.
It's then we reduce our influence in the world.
That's true.
Ipso facto. And so that's the real danger. And I've seen it already. I was down at the APEC meeting in Da Nang last November. First time I've ever seen this. 6 or 7 CEOs walked out of the room when President Trump started to speak. It's not good. And the hallway, as you well know, in these international meetings, the hallway chatter is more important than the
what's going on at the podium
itself, right? And so the hallway chatter was really frankly a little depressing.
So this projection of, I mean, it's not a projection yet because we're still trying to figure out where the pieces go and what pieces are going to get filled. But this projection of U.S. foreign policy, it's going through a significant baseline change.
Yeah.
And how does that affect the perceived or maybe the real power of the United States in accommodating our allies and our friends and trade issues and things like that?
Well, most power projection is based on perception anyway. I mean, it's not, when you get to the point where you're actually physically projecting that power, you've probably lost much of the game. It's the inference of that power, which is what maintains peace. So I think another really critical part of that is that you have a president who governs by tweets. And what it means is that if you're an ambassador of the United States and you issue a statement that you interpret to be American policy and then have it out-tweeted 24 hours later, it diminishes the influence of the United States tremendously because of our credibility lapse there. So this is what's really important. Credibility is what diplomacy is all about. And once we lose that, we lose the game.
So how does the Foreign Service, how does this cadre of people like yourself, I mean, 15, 20 years, you're in the mill before you kind of rise up and have even a chance to be considered as in an ambassadorial post.
Right.
This must have a tremendous erosion on people who aspire to that. And because there's always that option, I can go corporate or I can go government.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and what we're seeing right now is that initially at least, the junior Foreign Service officers who have not invested as much of their time in a career in the State Department yet are departing.
They're considering
other careers.
The other option.
And on top of that, there's a hiring freeze. So
that's right.
The bottom ranks are not being accommodated. This is a critical situation. And then on the other hand, the senior ranks, the senior Foreign Service, those who are in ambassadorial posts now, or maybe about to be, are departing. We have many, many mutual friends, Tim, who are ambassadors in many places in the world, and they're leaving because there is no go forward, and they're being undermined all the time.
So just sitting here talking on Tokyo on Fire about that, yeah, maybe it's going to change the dynamic. I kind of don't think so. But what this means is that the whole fabric of how foreign policy is laid out is undergoing a change globally, because the United States kind of leads the charge, and they kind of project what they're going to be doing, how it's going to be. And a lot of people have said all of the things that are being done by the current president have an effect that goes beyond his administration, maybe 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah.
And some of the decisions that are being made now, like the career advancement and the evisceration of the foreign service, it's going to have an echo, isn't it?
It's going to take years to repair this.
So that means, though, maybe it's not a repair, maybe it's a realignment of how we do things.
Yeah.
What's the thought on that?
Well, I think right now we've only been into this mess for a year, but I think right now the thought is, if there's new leadership in 4 years or whatnot, that we're going to try to go back and repair it. We have a brilliant foreign service. I mean, these people are pros.
No kidding.
And I myself was not a career diplomat. You know, I was a business guy and an academic, but I gained so much respect for the Foreign Service and working with them. And not only the State Department Foreign Service, there are other foreign services and other parts of the government. They're pros. So, I mean, when we lose those people, it's critical. Yeah.
Did President Obama have a visit to the current ambassador here in Tokyo?
He did not. And I'm
Protocol dictates?
No. I mean, I'm not sure what happened there, to be very honest with you. But that didn't take place. Now, I also heard that the ambassador may have been not in Japan this weekend, but I could be wrong on that. Yeah. Who, by the way, I've met, and I have a great deal of respect for him.
Oh no, I think he's going to do a great job. Yeah. You know, we're coming out of the Caroline Kennedy administration that went for a bit, not the entire length of the president's administration, but it's a different administration now. Yeah. It's dramatically different. The whole family is there. He's younger. He's engaged. And I'm very hopeful.
Yeah.
We have some significant challenges, though. I mean, the U.S.-Japan relationship is not altogether on the all fours.
Well, and I think, you know, Prime Minister Abe took a chance. I mean, back in November of just after the election, he immediately went there. And I will admit to you, I was critical of that. I felt we only have one president at a time. Having said that, in retrospect, later on, I began to think,
a little bit clever.
May have been a good idea, because he played to President Trump's ego, which is always important.
Which we didn't know at that point.
We knew, but we didn't know the extent of it.
Right.
At least I didn't. Maybe others did. But having said that, it certainly doesn't seem to have worked out too well on steel. I thought it was a real slap in the face of the Japanese. They're not even a major exporter of steel in the United States, and it's a specialty kind of steel anyway. You know, so I think that is a real problem. And I think that the other major issue with Japan, of course, right now is the situation in North Korea, and it's vital for the U.S. and Japan to cooperate on that.
There's a little bit of a Yeah,
it's tricky business. Anytime you deal with Japan and the Korean Peninsula, it's never easy. And there is some worry among some that if there was going to be a conflict, that the North Koreans might want to go after Japan rather than their brethren in the South. I don't know about that, but those, I think, are the two main issues right now that we face, is the territorial issues. The third one would be with China, and how the United States backs that up.
How they back it up, and what the response is from the Chinese as
You're
well.
Right.
$3 billion in somewhat retaliatory tariffs being implemented or considered.
That's right, and the Chinese, and they're not going to roll over for this. And of course, the danger is this, and it's translated into the stock market.
Yes,
I mean, you have a situation where it is totally volatile. You know, as shareholders, we watch this closely. And I think
it's pretty immediate.
And it went down. I think it went down up 700 points yesterday. It was down 400 points the day before. And so, yeah, it's immediate. Exactly. Yeah,
it's not a good sign.
Yeah, no, it's very dangerous.
And I think there's probably, you might agree with this, there's a lot more that's coming down the pipeline that we can anticipate as shareholders, as voters, as people who are involved in, foreign policy, foreign trade.
Well, I think unfortunately, I think the potential for greater instability is there. I mean, we have now a new leadership in the White House relative to foreign policy and at the State Department that is pretty hawkish.
John Bolton.
John Bolton, who I once worked for in 1982. I think it would be a mistake to underestimate him. I think he's actually a very bright fellow, but he takes policy stances that are pretty hard line, and it worry me a lot.
The president is surrounded by those individuals, isn't he? He sure is. Yeah,
and I think that's something that we should really be worried about.
It could be part of the message for delivery. I mean, maybe it's just the bark, not the bite.
Well, I think traditionally the National Security Advisor is sort of a way station, not a way station, but someone who kind of fields various inputs on foreign policy, and at the end of the day weighs in on himself. But we really don't know if that's the way that John Bolton's going to handle this. We just know that he's pretty hard line, and so there's a lot of question marks right now out there about this. There's a lot of concern, and not only in the United States but overseas.
You know, in one session on Tokyo on Fire, we just can't cover it all. I hope that you can come back on again. We can talk about other specific issues. Sure. But before we wrap this session up, is there anything else that you'd like to add about what you've done or what you're going to be doing or what's in store for the U.S.-Japan relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, as for me, I just would like to relate a story that of President Obama, that his mother had worked for the Asian Development Bank. He had told me that, and I remembered it. And then when he came to Manila in 2014, April.
State visit?
State visit to the Philippines. Otherwise, we would have brought him to the ADB. But the White House said he wanted to spend about 20 minutes with me privately. So I was able to do that. And before I met with him, I thought to myself, now what am I going to talk about to the president about? And so then I remembered the story about his mother. So I asked the ADB staff to find any and all reports ever written by his mother. And we found about 400 pages. And we collected them into a book, and a beautiful book called The Collected Works of Dr. Ann Dunham for the Asian Development Bank, presented to President Barack Obama April 28, 2014 by the United States Mission to the Asian Development Bank.
And that's how you become the longest serving ambassador.
But he was very moved.
A stroke of genius.
Yeah, and
big, thick.
Oh, yeah, it was 400 pages. And he and my staff was brilliant. I mean, they were amazing. They went through the whole book, and they, with a yellow marker, they outlined every place where his mother's name was and all of her writing. I never thought about that. And so when I gave it to him, he was moved. And I'll say this, that every time after that, even Sunday, when I was talking to him, one of the first things he said was, you know, Skipp, he said, it was the best book in my 8 years.
Wow.
Best president in my 8 years of president. Yeah.
And in fact, it turns out he likes your wife more than he likes you.
I think that's the case.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you very much, Ambassador Orr. It's great to have you on the show. It's a great honor to sit here and talk with you. Please, let's make some time for you to come back again. Let's talk about some of these other issues, and I'm sure there'll be some hot buttons to keep this show on fire. You're watching Tokyo on Fire. Please stay tuned, because we're going to be hitting this over and over again to keep you up to date. Thanks.